In 47 blistering seconds, Marjorie Taylor Greene spat venom across a packed congressional chamber, calling Jasmine Crockett a black monkey, go back to the zoo, on live TV. A hush fell so heavy it seemed to press on every chest. Even the camera crew forgot to breathe, their lenses frozen mid-focus. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hand slid to a golden-sealed envelope like it held a loaded weapon. What truth inside could shatter a career and shake the nation to its core? The cameras were already rolling when Jasmine Crockett took her seat at the long oak table. Behind her, the seal of the House Ethics Committee hung like an unblinking eye. Every chair was filled lawmakers in tailored suits, journalists balancing laptops on their knees, camera crews crouched behind heavy lenses, waiting for a moment they could sell to the evening news. Outside, the marble steps swarmed with protesters, the winter air carrying the warm scent of candle smoke. Flags snapped sharply in the wind, and the rhythmic thud of boots on stone echoed like a distant war drum beneath the chamber floor. Some signs read, "Justice has no color." Others simply bore Jasmine's name in bold red letters. Inside, the air was dense, almost heavy, the kind of stillness that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Jasmine sat tall, shoulders squared, voice low but sharp enough to slice the tension. She spoke of a nation still poisoned by racial slurs and politics, and how those words were never just words, they were weapons. Every syllable seemed to hang in the air longer than it should, as if the walls themselves were listening. And then the blade. Black monkey. Go back to the zoo? Marjorie Taylor Greene's voice ripped through the chamber like a gunshot in a church. The words were cold, deliberate, dripping with a venom that didn't need volume to kill the air. Every head turned. Greene leaned back, half-smile curling on her lips, all teeth and no warmth. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face, the look of someone who thought they'd just seized control of the room. The chamber froze. No papers shuffled. No whispers broke the silence. Just the echo of those words carried live through hot microphones into millions of homes. Somewhere in the building, a producer's voice cut through an earpiece, shaky and urgent. We're live. We're live. Oh my God. On split screens across America, anchors stared into cameras, wide-eyed. In the gallery, a woman covered her mouth, her knuckles white. A reporter's fingers hovered over a keyboard, caught between typing and choking on the moment. At the center of it all, Jasmine didn't blink. Her hand closed around the pen in front of her plastic, flexing under the pressure. The faintest twitch of her jaw hinted that the blow had landed, but she wasn't going to bleed here. Behind her calm, something turned slow, deliberate, dangerous, like a key finding its groove in a lock. And no one knew if the silence that followed was the sound of her surrender, or the quiet before she unleashed the storm. Phones lit up before the echo of Greene's words even faded. Clips hit Twitter and X in seconds, shaky cell footage. Crisp TV feeds, captions screaming the slur. Hashtags exploded zoo. Slur stand with Jasmine. Newsrooms scrambled, producers barked orders, and commentators leaned forward in disbelief, some shaking their heads on live TV. Outside the Capitol, the air buzzed with incoming voices. Protesters spilled onto the marble steps, their faces tight with anger. Some holding cardboard signs scrawled with "Justice has no color, and we stand with Jasmine." Others held up phones, live streaming to thousands. The chants were low at first, but growing a distant thunder, pounding toward the building. Inside, the tension wound itself tighter, wrapping around every word and gesture. Reper Luis Vega leaned toward Jasmine, voice low but fierce. "You don't have to take that," he said, his jaw locked like stone. Across the table, journalist Dana Kim scribbled in frantic bursts, the pen's tip scratching deep lines into her notepad. Her phone buzzed over and over, editors demanding quotes, but she didn't look up from Jasmine's face. On the other side of the room, Greene reclined in her chair as if she owned the oxygen. She tilted toward her aide, lips barely moving. "Watch her lose it," she whispered, the corner of her mouth curling upward. The aide's almost silent chuckle floated in the air, a cruel punctuation mark. Jasmine heard it. She didn't flinch. Her shoulders stayed anchored, her gaze fixed past Greene like she could see something no one else could. Her pen tapped once against the table, not a nervous tick, but a measured beat like a countdown only she knew. Then she spoke, her voice even almost calm. "I'll respond at the right time." It wasn't a reassurance to her allies. It was a warning to the room. The aide's smirk faltered for just a moment. Cameras zoomed in, hunting for a fracture in her expression. They found none, just steel. A ripple of whispers ran through the gallery, like a quick wind in dry leaves. Security shifted along the walls, scanning the crowd. Someone in the back muttered under their breath, "She's planning something." Green shuffled her papers, slowly regaining her practiced smirk, though it didn't sit as easily as before. Jasmine's stare never wavered. It wasn't passive patience. It was the poised stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect strike. Outside, the chants hit the marble walls like war drums. Inside, the red lights of every camera burned hotter. The right time was coming, and when it landed, it wouldn't just answer Green's insult. It would set the room and maybe the country on fire. Committee Chair Evelyn Brooks leaned forward, her gavel hitting the wood with a sharp crack. "Representative Green, this committee will not tolerate language of that nature." She said, her voice steady but edged with steel. All eyes swung to Green. She shrugged, lips pursed, and leaned back like she'd just been asked to pass the salt. The air in the room shifted. Viewers at home could feel it through their screens, the defiance, the smugness. Green's posture said she wasn't afraid of a slap on the wrist. She thought she was untouchable. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She began slowly, her tone calm but carrying weight. "When my father served in the military," she said, "he fought for a country that called him names I will not repeat here. Names meant to remind him he didn't belong. Words meant to make him feel smaller than the uniform he wore." The gallery stilled. Even the faint hum of the cameras seemed to fade. She spoke about her father's letters home, ink smeared from hands that had been working 18-hour days, and how those same hands had carried her on his shoulders at civil rights marches. She painted the memory in vivid strokes, the crowd's roar, the sting of tear gas, the way her father's grip tightened when voices in the crowd spat words like the one Green had just used. Green rolled her eyes. The movement was small, but the cameras caught it from 3 angles. Within seconds, producers at news networks flagged the shot for replay. On one split screen, Jasmine's steady face. On the other, Green's dismissive glare. Jasmine paused, letting the moment breathe. Her gaze swept the committee table, the gallery, the cameras. Then she leaned forward, her hands folded loosely in front of her. "You see," she said, "when you say something like that to me, you're not just talking to Jasmine Crockett. You're talking to every man and woman who's ever been told they don't belong here." She let that sink in. Green's smirk wavered, not much, but enough for the people who knew how to spot the first crack. The aide beside her shifted in his seat. Then Jasmine's tone sharpened, her eyes locking onto Green like a laser sight. "And I have proof," she said, each word clipped and precise, "that this moment is bigger than just your words." The room inhaled as one. The gavel rested in Brooks's hand, unmoving. And somewhere in that tense silence, the question landed, what proof could make the insult look small? In comparison, Jasmine didn't break eye contact with Green. Slowly, she reached down beside her chair, fingers brushing the worn leather of her satchel. When her hand emerged, it carried a gold-sealed envelope stamped with the crest of the House Ethics Committee, the seal gleaming under the harsh chamber lights. A low murmur rolled through the room, a wave of sound that didn't reach words. Cameras zoomed in on the seal, the lens pulling the gold into sharp focus. Across the table, Green's aide froze, mid-note, his pen hovering in the air. His eyes darted from the envelope to Green, then back again like he'd just seen a fuse being lit. Jasmine placed it on the table with a quiet, deliberate tap. She didn't open it. She just let it sit there, a silent object that suddenly felt heavier than any gavel in the room. The way her fingers lingered on it made the air feel tighter, like the walls had leaned in to listen. In the back of the chamber, a photographer adjusted her lens without blinking. The sound of the camera's click echoed like a countdown. Green leaned forward slightly, narrowing her eyes, trying to read the moment. And then a flicker in Jasmine's gaze, almost a shift in time. The scene cut to late nights in a dimly lit home office. Jasmine hunched over stacks of documents, the lamplight catching the edge of a manila folder marked "Confidential." A voice on the phone, muffled but tense, outlined a story that could ruin a career. She scribbled notes, her pen moving like it couldn't keep up with her thoughts. Another flash rep. Luis Vega standing in the doorway of that same office. "If you drop this," he warned, voice low, "you can't go back." Jasmine didn't look up. "I'm not planning to." The folder stayed in her hands. The choice had already been made. Back in the chamber, the envelope remained untouched. Green's fingers drummed the table, but the rhythm was uneven now. The age shifted in his seat again, jaw tightening. Jasmine rested her palms on either side of the envelope, not to protect it, but to own it. Her eyes swept the room one slow time, letting every camera, every spectator, every lawmaker feel the weight of what she was about to do. What could be inside that envelope that was worth risking her career and possibly ending someone else's? Jasmine didn't rush. She rose from her seat slowly, the movement deliberate, forcing every camera in the room to follow her. Her fingers slid under the gold seal, and the faint rip of paper tearing hissed through the hot microphones, amplified until it felt like the whole room could hear each fiber break. The envelope opened its flap, falling back. Inside, not a stack of papers, not a letter, but a small black USB drive. She held it up between her fingers, letting the light catch it. A murmur rippled through the chamber, sharper this time. Green's smirk faltered for just a beat. Jasmine didn't walk to the display system. Not yet. She placed the USB down beside her microphone, close enough for the cameras to linger on it, far enough that no one could see what was on it. The tension tightened. Whatever it held, it could wait. And waiting was the point. A chime from the system broke the stillness. The screens on the walls flickered, then went black before a waveform appeared, jagged lines pulsing in sync with a voice. MTG's voice. It was unmistakable. "Look, we have to keep America white," it said, casual but cold. "If that means blocking immigration reform forever, so be it." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Gasps rippled through the room, a chain reaction of disbelief and outrage. In the gallery, someone's chair scraped loudly against the floor. Cameras zoomed in on Green. Her eyes were wide now, her mouth tightening into something that wasn't a smile. She glanced at her aide, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. The color in her cheeks drained, replaced with a stiff, calculated stillness. The audio kept playing. The donor's voice murmured agreement, promising funding. MTG laughed on the recording, not the nervous laugh of a politician, but the low, satisfied chuckle of someone sealing a deal. The waveforms faded. The speakers went quiet. All that remained was the sound of heavy breathing in the room and through the broadcast feed. Jasmine didn't say a word. She just looked at Green, letting the silence stretch like a blade between them. Somewhere deep in the building, the control room debated whether to cut the feed. But it was too late. Millions had already heard it. Was the recording real, or could Green spin her way out before the truth closed in? The last words of the recording were still hanging in the air when the first chair scraped back. A Republican member in the second row stood abruptly, muttered something under his breath, and headed for the exit. Two more followed their footsteps, sharp against the marble, as if putting distance could erase the sound they just heard. Across the press section, the clatter of keyboards erupted. Journalists typed furiously, eyes darting between their screens and the shifting chaos in the chamber. Donna Kim, phone in hand, tapped out a single line. "This just went nuclear." Within seconds, her post was climbing into trending territory. Jasmine stayed on her feet. Her voice cut clean through the noise, not loud but impossible to ignore. "This isn't about parties," she said, turning her gaze from one side of the room to the other. "This is about the soul of the country." The words didn't just land. They rooted themselves, daring anyone to pull them out. Chair Brooks, who had been watching the scene with narrowed eyes, tapped her gavel twice. "We'll recess for 10 minutes, she announced, though her tone made it sound like a sentence, not a schedule. The order did little to slow the undercurrent in the room, a hum of voices, hurried phone calls, the shuffle of staffers darting in and out. Green pushed her chair back hard enough to make it skid. She didn't look at Jasmine. Instead, she leaned toward her lawyer, whispering in a rapid-fire hiss. Whatever she said made his brow tighten. He gathered his papers quickly, as if they needed to leave before the walls closed in. They strode toward the exit, Green's heels striking the floor in sharp, angry beats. Cameras swiveled to follow her, catching the set of her jaw and the rigid line of her shoulders. In the corner of the shot, her aide trailed behind his phone, pressed to his ear. Jasmine watched them go, her expression unreadable. She didn't move until the heavy chamber doors swung shut. Only then did she return to her seat, her hand resting lightly on the now empty envelope, as if it still held weight. Outside those doors, somewhere in the maze of hallways, Green was already plotting her move. The break was only 10 minutes. What would her counterattack look like when the cameras came back on? The cameras were already aimed at the committee table when Jasmine finally reached for the USB. No build-up this time, she stood crossed to the display system and slid it into the port. A chime broke the stillness. The screens flickered, then went black, before a waveform appeared, jagged lines pulsing in sync with a voice. MTG's voice. "Look, we have to keep America white." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Gasps snapped through the room. And just as the outrage began to swell, the chamber doors swung open, Green walking in first, her lawyer just a step behind a thick folder tucked under her arm. The smirk was back on her face, sharp and deliberate, like she'd just reloaded. She moved with the confidence of someone who thought she'd found her way out. As she reached the table, she dropped the folder onto the wood with a heavy slap, making a few heads turn. Then she looked straight at the cameras, her smile widening. This, she began tapping the folder, is who Jasmine Crockett really is. A radical race baiter who hides behind a polished smile. She flipped the cover open, pulling out the first glossy sheet. It was a photograph Jasmine in the middle of a street protest, mouth open mid-chant. Around her, the crowd's fists were raised. Green held it up high for the cameras, her voice dripping with mock concern. "This is not peaceful dialogue. This is chaos." She moved to the next image, another protest scene. The frame was tight on Jasmine's face, but the background was cropped just enough to hide the candles, the flowers, the signs of a vigil. To an untrained eye, it could look like a mob. Jasmine didn't blink. She waited until Green finished her little gallery before leaning forward. That first image, she said evenly, was taken at a voting rights march in Selma, the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. The second, that was a candlelight vigil for a 12-year-old killed by stray gunfire. You cut the candles out of the frame. A murmur swept through the gallery. Even some of Green's own party members exchanged glances. The folder, still open on the table, now looked less like a weapon and more like a trap that had just snapped on its owner. Green forced a laugh, thin and brittle. She reached for another sheet, but her fingers hesitated over the stack. The cameras caught it, the tiny pause, the moment where certainty cracked. Jasmine sat back calm, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth had already spoken louder than Green's accusations. Was Green running out of ammunition, or was there still one last shot left in that folder chair? Brooks leaned forward, her voice carrying over the low hum of the room. "Representative Crockett, you may proceed." Jasmine didn't look at Green. Instead, she turned toward the chamber doors. "I have someone the committee needs to hear from," she said. The doors opened and a man in a plain gray suit stepped inside. His pace was steady, his expression unreadable. Brooks arched a brow. "State your name for the record." "Elliot Marsh," he said, voice firm. "Former staffer for Representative Green." That name hit like a spark in dry grass. Reporters shifted forward, pens poised. Green's eyes narrowed. Jasmine gestured to the witness table. "Mr. Marsh, can you tell the committee why you came here today?" He didn't hesitate. "Because what Representative Green said to you today wasn't the first time." A ripple of sound ran through the gallery. Marsh kept going. "Last year off camera, she used the exact same slur toward a Capitol custodian. I was there. I heard it." Green shot up from her chair, the folder in front of her forgotten. "Lies," she barked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. The outburst only made the cameras swing toward her, catching the sharp flush climbing her neck. Marsh didn't blink. He reached into his jacket and slid a folded printout across the table. "This," he said, "is the HR complaint I filed the same day. You'll see my signature at the bottom. And the date." Brooks took the page, scanning it briefly before passing it to the clerk. The room had gone still, the kind of silence that only comes when no one wants to miss a single word. Green stood, frozen lips pressed tight, as the clerk read the document aloud. The words were plain, the accusation clear. And in that moment, it didn't matter how many cameras were rolling, the weight of proof had landed right in front of the committee. Jasmine sat back, eyes on Green, not smiling, but steady. The kind of steady that says, "I told you this was bigger than today." Now the question wasn't whether Green had said the words. It was whether the committee would treat them as just an ethics violation or something that could end her career in a courtroom. Outside the chamber, the sound hit like a wave. Chants of justice for Jasmine rolled up the Capitol steps, bouncing off the marble columns. The crowd had swelled to hundreds, maybe more, their signs bobbing above the sea of heads. Cable news split the screen, half showing the hearing, half showing the street. In one frame, Jasmine sat poised at the witness table. In the other, protesters marched in tight formation, their voices merging into a single roar. The energy inside shifted with every chant outside. Reporters in the gallery stole glances at their phones, watching the live stream feeds explode with comments. "She's winning. Keep going. Don't back down." Reporter Luis Vega leaned toward Jasmine, his voice just above a whisper. "You've got her cornered," he said, eyes fixed on Green. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning wrapped in pride. Jasmine's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Cornered animals are dangerous," she replied softly, still watching Green. Her tone carried the weight of someone who'd been in enough fights to know the next punch could come from anywhere. Across the table, Green's pen scratched furiously across a legal pad. The smirk was gone. Her lawyer kept his head down, scribbling notes, but his shoulders were tight, his grip on the pen too hard. A sudden chant outside grew louder, almost deafening. Security near the doors shifted position. Through the tall windows, the movement of the crowd was visible, a slow, unified push closer to the building. Inside, the tension was thick enough to feel in the chest. Brooks tapped her gavel for order, but the sound was drowned out by the roar outside. Camera crews leaned in, eager to capture the contrast, one room full of rigid protocol, the other full of raw, unfiltered outrage. Jasmine stayed still, her gaze locked on Green, as if the protests outside were simply the echo of her own heartbeat. Green avoided her eyes, flipping through the folder, like the next page might hold an escape. But in that moment, there was no escaping the reality. The walls were closing in outside by the crowd, inside by the truth. And everyone in that chamber was asking the same question. What would Green do when she finally realized there was nowhere left to run? Green adjusted the microphone, unfolding a sheet of paper that looked like it had been gripped too tightly. Her eyes dropped to the text, but the words caught in her throat. She started reading the sentences, halting, her voice thinner than before. The cameras caught everything, the way her hand trembled as she turned the page, the subtle shake in her breath. This wasn't the smirking figure who'd walked in minutes earlier. This was someone trying to keep her footing on a floor that was already cracking. Chair Brooks leaned forward, her tone clipped. "Representative Green, the committee needs a direct response to the slur you used today, and to the recording played in this chamber." The room went still again. Even the protest chants outside seemed to fade. Green glanced at her lawyer, then back at Brooks. "The audio is a fabrication," she said finally, each word wrapped in forced confidence. "A deep fake." Her gaze swept the cameras as if daring the viewers to believe her. The claim hung in the air for only a second before Elliot Marsh spoke from his seat. "That's not true," he said, his voice steady but carrying. "I personally handled that file. The recording's chain of custody is intact. No edits. No manipulation." Brooks's eyes moved between the two of them, weighing every word. Green's jaw tightened, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. The paper in front of her crumpled slightly under her grip. In the gallery, a murmur started low, then rising. Journalists exchanged glances, already typing the headline in their minds. "Whistleblower shuts down deepfake claim." The tension swelled, thick and suffocating. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just sat there, her gaze locked on Green like she was watching a wall crumble brick by brick. The silence from her side of the table was louder than any accusation. Green shifted in her seat, eyes darting to the exits for just a fraction of a second. It was enough to show the first real sign of retreat. If she couldn't deny it, if she couldn't spin it, then what exactly did she have left? The moment felt like a dam breaking. Representative David Huang, one of Green's own party members, adjusted his microphone and leaned forward. "I cannot in good conscience support Representative Green's continued role in this Congress," he said, his voice firm, carrying across the chamber like a gavel strike. The words hit harder because they came from her side of the aisle. Green didn't turn her head, but the stiff set of her jaw told everyone she'd heard. Huang gathered his papers, sliding them neatly into a folder, and sat back with finality, his position now carved in stone. Almost instantly, phones in the press section lit up. Two more Republican representatives posted statements online condemning Green's remark as beyond the bounds of civil discourse. One called it a stain on the institution. The screenshots traveled at the speed of outrage, filling feeds before Green could even form a rebuttal. The chamber felt colder now, the air pulling back from her like a tide retreating. Even the allies who remained in their seats avoided her eyes, their gazes fixed on paperwork that didn't need reading. Green sat on her bench, shoulders squared, but alone in a way that cameras loved the isolation of a fallen figure in high definition. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't move. Her silence was deliberate, the stillness amplifying every crack in Green's armor. With each passing second, the balance of power shifted further away, the gap widening into a chasm. From the gallery, a low hum of whispers rose and fell like a current. Staffers passed notes down the row, some with quick glances toward Green, others toward the committee chair. The story was writing itself, and everyone knew it. Green flipped a page in the folder before her, though it was clear she wasn't reading. The movement was mechanical, a stall for time she didn't have. Outside, the chants from the crowd grew louder again, seeping through the heavy doors, reminding her that the fight wasn't just in this room. Her bench felt longer, emptier. The distance between her and the rest of her party might as well have been miles. And with each breath, the question loomed larger, pressing in on every corner of the chamber. Was resignation now inevitable? Jasmine rose slowly, her hands resting lightly on the table for balance. The room quieted without a gavel, as if everyone sensed what was about to happen. Her voice was steady low, carrying just enough to reach the corners of the chamber. My grandparents marched in streets where their skin was seen as a threat, she began. They sat at lunch counters where they were told they didn't belong. They faced police dogs, fire hoses, and mobs, not because they wanted trouble, but because they wanted a voice. The air thickened with each word. She spoke of her grandmother sewing her Sunday dress in secret so she could attend rallies without her employer knowing. Of her grandfather, a war veteran returning home only to be called names that stripped away the uniform, but never his pride. When you use that slur, Jasmine said, her gaze fixed on Green. You didn't just speak to me. You spoke to every person who's ever had to swallow the taste of that word. You spoke to my grandparents and you told them their fight meant nothing. Her voice didn't waver, but a single tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't fragility. It was the kind of tear that came from a place deeper than anger, the place where pain becomes resolve. She didn't wipe it away. She let it stay a silent witness. In the gallery, a woman stood up, hands clasped together. Another followed. Soon the entire section was on its feet, clapping despite protocol forbidding it. The sound filled the chamber, a sharp contrast to the cold silence that had surrounded Green moments before. Chair Brooks didn't stop them. She simply watched, letting the applause wash over the room like a tide. Even some members of the committee looked down at their desks, unwilling to break the moment. Jasmine held the room in the palm of her hand. She glanced briefly at the protest signs visible through the tall windows, then back to the faces before her. We don't get to choose the battles we're handed, she said softly, but we do get to choose how we finish them. The clapping slowed, replaced by an expectant hush. Everyone knew she wasn't done. The only question was, what final move would Jasmine make to ensure justice was served? The gavel struck once, pulling the chamber back to order. Chair Brooks sat straighter than before, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of finality. This committee has reached a unanimous decision, she said, scanning the room with deliberate care. Representative Green will be formally censured and removed from all committee assignments. The words landed heavy, their echo lingering in the vaulted chamber. Green didn't flinch, but her jaw locked so tight the muscle twitched under the lights. Her eyes stayed forward, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, as if staring straight ahead could hold back the walls closing in. In the gallery, a wave of whispers swelled like a collective exhale. Reporters began typing furiously, the sound of clicking keys mixing with the low hum of voices. A cameraman shifted position to catch Green's profile, the rigid posture, the clenched jaw, the hands gripping the edge of the table. Across the room, Jasmine's allies exchanged small wordless glances. Luis Vega gave a barely perceptible nod, the kind two people share when they've survived something together. Dana Kim let out a breath. She didn't know she was holding her pen, finally still in her hand. Brooks continued, her tone unshaken. This recommendation will be forwarded immediately to House leadership for action. She set the gavel down gently, the sound somehow louder than the strikes from earlier. No one moved right away. The gravity of the moment pinned them in place. Outside the tall windows, the protest chants swelled again, carried in by the cold air that seeped through the old stone. Inside, the heat of the spotlight burned on Green's face, though she never turned to acknowledge it. Jasmine sat quietly, hands folded, watching without triumph or gloating. Her calmness was deliberate, as if she knew the fight wasn't over. Not here, not now. The cameras caught every detail, the victor's stillness, the defeated silence, the room holding its breath, between one chapter ending and the next. Was this the end of Green's reign, or just the turning of a page in a much bigger battle? The cold air outside hit like a wall, but the sound hit harder. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, the light strobing across Jasmine's face as she stepped onto the Capitol steps. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended, voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus of questions. She raised a hand not to quiet them, but to steady the moment. Her voice was clear, carrying over the noise. "This is not about revenge," she said. "It's about protecting the values that hold this country together. When power mocks the powerless, we all have a responsibility to speak out." The crowd beyond the press line roared in approval. Protest signs waved above the heads, catching the winter sunlight. Some bore her name, others carried simple words: dignity, justice, truth. The chant rose again. "Jasmine, Jasmine, Jasmine," rolling down the steps like a drumbeat. A reporter shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" Jasmine paused just long enough to meet his eye. "I feel determined," she answered. "Because today was about one person's words, but tomorrow it could be about yours, or your neighbor's, or your child's." Across the plaza, a separate group of cameras waited for Green. But when the doors opened, she was flanked by aides who formed a tight wall around her. No statements, no answers. Only the sound of hurried footsteps and the occasional barked, "No comment." The visual contrast was stark. On one side, Jasmine in the open, standing in the glare, speaking to anyone who asked. On the other, Green moving like a shadow, trying to disappear before the narrative solidified. Jasmine took one last question before stepping away, her coat catching the wind as she descended the steps. The chant swelled again, following her to the black car waiting at the curb. She turned once, giving the crowd a small nod. Not a wave, not a show, just an acknowledgement. The cameras caught it all: the roar of the people, the silence of her opponent. The day justice spoke in full view of the nation. How would history remember this day? The night came quickly, but the story didn't slow down. Headlines flashed across every major network: ethics committee moves against Green Crockett stands tall amid racial slur firestorm, justice on the House floor. Social media feeds lit up with tributes. Photos of Jasmine walking out of the chamber side by side with quotes from her speech reshared millions of times. Op-eds poured in from across the political spectrum. Some called it a turning point for congressional accountability. Others said it was a rare moment when the moral center held. The images told their own story: the gold-sealed envelope, Green's stunned expression, the standing ovation in the gallery. In a quiet living room far from the Capitol, Jasmine sat on a couch next to her mother. The TV replayed the moment the gavel fell, the chants outside still audible through the broadcast. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their hands were clasped, the grip firm, the silence saying everything words couldn't. On the screen, the replay cut to Jasmine's tear during her speech, then back to Green's face in the seconds after the audio played. The contrast was stark. Jasmine's mother gave her hand one tight squeeze, pride shimmering in her eyes. A voice over Jasmine's, but softer now, played over the montage. "Justice isn't the end. It's the next beginning." The images shifted: the protests in the streets, young people registering to vote, volunteers painting banners for the next march. The music swelled low at first, then rising with strings and steady percussion. Jasmine's living room faded to black, replaced by one last line in white letters. "What would you have done in that room?" There are moments like the one Jasmine faced today that are more than a political confrontation. They are a test of conscience and courage. When you stand up, you do not speak only for yourself, but for all those who have been forced into silence for far too long. If you were in that room facing the insult and the gaze of an entire nation, would you bow your head or let the truth speak? If this moment struck something deep in you, don't just scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where courage meets truth and every voice can tip the balance. Turn on the bell, because the next story won't just uncover what's hidden, it might challenge what you believe. Now it's your turn. If you had been in that chamber, hearing those words and seeing that envelope open, what would you have done? Drop your answer below, share this with someone who refuses to stay silent, and let's make sure the echo of today becomes the change of tomorrow. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.